Welcome to another edition of Falmouth Cares Business Roundtable. I'm your host, Troy Clarkson, and we're very pleased once again to be joined by a great group of business people and local people who can provide a perspective about how business and government can partner during this continued pandemic. With me, as always, are Bill Zammer, Gary Vacon, and Michael Kasparian, and we're very pleased this week to have a couple of guests, Beth Colt from Quick's Hole and the Woods Hole Inn and the Treehouse Lodge, and Steve Clark, who's the Vice President of Government Affairs with the Mass Restaurant Association. So thank you everyone once again for joining us. We're really pleased to bring this valuable show to people who work in or patronize or own small businesses. That encompasses just about everyone in our community. So we're really pleased to be able to have this dialogue and help you continue to understand and wade through the maze of assistance that is available. So let's get right to it. I'll throw it to start off, Bill and Beth, to you as business owners who have successfully begun the process of working with the Paycheck Protection Program through the CARES Act. Why don't you just share a little bit of an update about how you found the experience, maybe share some of the successes, some of the challenges that you've seen, and offer anything you might be useful to help people who are still dealing with that. Beth, as our guest, we'll start with you.
Sure. I looked at the lay of the land, a month ago and really assessed that obviously having as much extra cash as possible would be critical in trying to get through a difficult time. And just for reference, the Woods Hole Inn is open year round and typically at this time of year would be open and has, a lot of advanced bookings for the summer and often gets busy in April and into May. And then I also have Quick's Hole Tavern, which is also open year round and is close to the ferry terminal. And so just, gets that sort of steady traffic, people coming on and off the island. And then, on evenings and weekends, people come down to Woods Hole for a nice dinner on the waterfront. Even in the slow season, that tends to happen. So we chose to close both of those businesses at the time that the governor, made his pronouncements. I think it was March 17th. We could have pivoted to takeout at the tavern. We just didn't feel that the traffic was going to be enough. And our setup is challenging for takeout. It's just not ideal. Neither our menu nor our setup is ideal as currently conceived for takeout. So didn't make a lot of sense for us. I think it's fantastic that there are restaurants in Falmouth that are in the process of, and have really figured that out, and they're offering such an important service, and people are really taking advantage of it. And I think it's also really heartfelt to see people making donations to send, large amounts of food into hospitals, into the police station, into our first responders. I mean, I just think that's such an amazing example of how we're coming together as a community. Anyway, I applied for the PPP loan through the Martha's Vineyard Savings Bank, which is where my other loans are. So I had already had a relationship there. They were familiar with me and my books. And it went very quickly. And they had a portal open the very first day that you could apply, which was April 3rd. And then they sent out an email saying, don't bother us because we are getting so many calls, but we do have you. And it was quite a number of days later, like maybe more than 10, that I got an email, another one saying, we're about to fund your loan. And I, of course, I had to apply. My entities I have two different legal entities. So the Woods Hole Inn is one entity and Quick's Hole is another. So I actually had to do two applications to make that work. And I think it's a struggle for businesses that are in somewhat of a forced closure mode. I know, Bill talked about this last week on the show, but the clock starts ticking the day you get the loan. And, for a non-seasonal business, the full 8 weeks is probably forgivable. You're going to be able to you're going to get that money back from the government. But for those of us who are closed, it's unclear when we can get open and if we can get open in time to make any of that 8-week period worth our while. That said, a 2-year loan at 1% when you don't have to make payments for 6 months in this environment is also really positive. So I'll take it. And, I'm grateful to federal government for thinking really big picture and throwing a lot of resources, and also remembering small businesses, because as you all know, in 08 and 09, small businesses were not really taken care of in this way. So I'm grateful for that.
Excellent. Well, that's a really helpful perspective. And I think, Bill, as a small business owner yourself, who's worked with another regional bank, the Cape Cod Five, to really access some of that same working capital, you've now, for the last few weeks, been able to share with us how that process has unfolded from your perspective. So where are you at, and what lessons can you share with our viewers?
Well, like Beth, I have a number of entities. So one of my loans actually closed yesterday, and the money is in the bank this morning, which, as Beth points out, the clock is now clicking. So I've got 8 weeks to start. I'm paying these employees, although I'm not open. So they're going to get paid for sitting at home. And if you take me out to the 8 weeks, I'm out there somewhere in June, in May, and I'm not open yet. And who knows when I'm going to open. The part that I'm concerned with everyone, and people are very confused with, and I'm sure Steve will give us a little hand on this, is the forgiveness portion. I have no idea if I'm going to comply with the forgiveness portion. Mm-hmm. If I don't, I've just given away 8 weeks of pay for a group of employees, and I'll do that 4 times. I have 4 different loans, and it's scary in one respect, but it's worth the risk. I think I comply, but I don't know. But I'm gonna let Steve really get into that. It's not been a really easy process. I've gotten the money, I fill out the applications. We've gone through all kinds of revisions of how it works, and we decided to go with it. And I've had numerous phone calls. I mean, Beth, I had numerous phone calls from restaurateurs all over the Cape asking me what I was doing, and I said I really have to look at it carefully. So, but Steve, I'm sure you can fill us in on what you know from the Restaurant Association standpoint.
So Steve,
I'm happy to dive into some of the issues that have been highlighted, and then I can kind of do a run around the industry of where we are. However you want to have me dive into it, I can do that. But the PPP inherently has limitations for the restaurant industry. Now, one thing to remember is the PPP was written for all businesses to be able to apply for. And so if you're the construction company, or if you're the accounting office, or if you're the dentist office, as soon as the government gives you the green light to open, you're going to be back to full business. Now, the restaurant industry is a little different because the government may not put the green light on for us right away, and we may have to ramp up back to full occupancy, whether we're at 35%, 50%, 75%, whatever it is. There's probably going to be some government mandates that we need to hit, being able to open. And then the second one is that customers are going to drive our reopen process. If you have a consumer that's outside working in the yard and they're wearing a mask, is it likely that they're going to be in a restaurant in 2 weeks or 3 weeks? I would say probably not. So we have those two realities driving our reopen process. And so the PPP, with the 8-week clock starting immediately as the money hits the account, may not be the best path for restaurateurs to take. Now, some statewide numbers, I think about 10% of the recipients of PPP funding are in the restaurant industry. And one thing to keep in mind is, restaurants need capital right now. There are many places that are not generating any revenue, and those that have takeout and delivery in a traditional business, 20% is takeout and delivery. So those that you're building that up, some people are building it up from scratch. So they saw an opportunity that the federal government is putting money out there. But as we have raised with the National Restaurant Association probably 3 weeks ago, there's real problems with the PPP and being able to comply with all of the numbers that you need to hit to get true forgiveness. And to make it even more complicated is the $600 bonus that unemployment workers are getting now from the federal government that started hitting unemployment checks 2 weeks ago, where you essentially have an incentive for an employee to reject the employer's offer to come back to work so that the employer can meet the forgiveness numbers. So you have an employee that's getting compensated for being at home, and then you have an employer that's trying to get them back. There's inherent disconnect there, which is going to lead to a problem. Now, under UI laws, the employee is supposed to certify that they're not getting hours offered by their employer. And eventually we are under the impression that will catch up to the employer. But right now, I don't think the state's going to push anybody off the UI system because they exerted efforts across the state to get people onto the UI system. So they're certainly not going to begin to kick people off the rolls, even though they have hours available to them that's being offered by the employer. Eventually, I do think the system will catch up and employers will be able to certify that employees are being offered hours and not taking them. But I don't think that's going to happen in the short term. So there's a number of issues as to why the PPP is problematic for the restaurant industry. Just to add some of the numbers and the impact on the restaurant industry, we were the first ones to be shut down by the government. In the most recent number that we've heard is that we are over $1 billion in lost sales since we were taken down on March 15th, and more than 200,000 employees have been put on unemployment. That's really a staggering number for our industry. Just to give you a little the scope of our restaurant industry, we do about $17 billion in sales, and we employ 300,000 employees per year, which is 10% of the state's workforce. So think of that impact of what's happening just in our state. And this same story can be said in Arkansas, in Florida, in Michigan, in New Jersey, in California. The restaurant industry is getting crushed across the country with lost sales and lost employees. So the National Restaurant Association actually came out today with a restaurant industry blueprint for recovery. And it's another ask to Congress, which basically would create a food service industry recovery fund. And it would allow restaurants to get access to that capital that they're going to need to A, recover from a government-ordered closure, B, give access to startup capital that restaurants are going to need to reopen, whether it's restocking inventory, supplying the workplace with new safety equipment, rehiring and retraining, et cetera. All of the issues that the restaurant industry is going to have to overcome is going to need to be paid for somehow. And the PPP isn't going to allow that anyway. You're restricted to only pay for payroll and for mortgage. Additionally, it would extend the PPP program to allow operators to use it beyond the 8-week window that's currently there. And it would also create a tax credit for restaurants to be able to modify their facilities to continue social distancing, enhance sanitization, and employee education, and all the other issues that are going to come with a reopen process. So that's a whole mouthful. I've given a lot. I'll press pause there, and if anyone has questions on what I've outlined or what some of those initiatives are, I'm happy to take a breath.
Great. Well, let's then throw it back to our industry professionals, and at this point, we'll bring in Michael Kasparian as well, who's the president of the local Chamber of Commerce. And so, thank you very much, Steve. I mean, you've outlined, I think, what the next steps might be, and that's one of the things we've been talking about on the show for a few weeks, is to really understand how the process is unfolding and what more we need to do. And it's the big we in terms of business and the government working together. I know you raised your hand, Bill, wanted to follow up on that one.
Yeah, Troy, Steve, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what are you looking at time frame? What are you hearing from the our people as to when opening and all that type of thing? And also, can you touch a little bit more on the social distancing when we open up, while we have you on the line?
So I think right now the beginnings of plans are being put together. I think anything and everything is on the table for what a reopen could look like. The Restaurant Association sent out a survey on Thursday night at the request of the governor's office to kind of gauge the industry of what people could deal with, what restrictions could work. Thinking outside the box, do we expand our dining operations into, a parking lot or a sidewalk or a patio? And, what's the process that would take to do that? So I think everything is on the table in terms of people coming into our restaurant, maximizing outdoor opportunities, maximizing reservations so we don't have people standing around waiting to come into our restaurant, but also on the back end encouraging our consumers that, they're not going to sit around for 2 hours and talk. We got to move them around and flip those tables. Time frame is still murky. I do think that the conversation actually changed last week for the first time, where government officials started talking about what a reopen could look like. Now, whether that's a three-tier restaurant reopening within the broader three-tier system that they're talking about nationally. Anything, as May 5th is still the date that the governor has said. He has not moved off that date yet. If I was a betting man, I'd say that will be moved, whether it's moved a week, 2 weeks, or what have you. So it's still kind of gray in terms of when those phases would begin. But, I'd be optimistic that hopefully we could get one of those phases in the next couple of weeks to start that process, and hopefully have phase 1 implemented, by Memorial Day.
My question is, I've been paying for years business interruption insurance, which is meant to help any kind of a crisis. And I was told, that I could file a claim, but it was likely to be denied. And when the adjuster called me, he asked me, was there any physical damage to your property? And I said, yes, there's a virus all over the room, and I'm concerned that I can't operate with the virus. He was like, no, I mean actual physical damage. And I said, I think a virus is physical damage. So I'm just curious to know what the Mass Restaurant Association is doing in terms of I know that there are thousands and thousands of business owners like me who have insurance that they're frustrated by at this moment.
It's probably the number one inquiry that we get in terms of what can be done. And there has been legislation that's been filed in Massachusetts and filed in other states. Truthfully, I think we're going to need a federal backstop program to solve this problem. Insurance companies are rich, but they don't have unlimited funds. And if you think about all of the claims that are going to be made solely just by the restaurant industry, but then when you layer in cruise lines and theaters and professional sports and all those industries with all the losses that they've had, and they all have virus exclusionary policies, we're going to need some sort of federal backstop program that authorizes the payout of those policies, and then they would backstop the insurance companies. And that's a little bit what the Restaurant Recovery Fund would do. It would get the capital into the hands of the employer. The capital into the hands of the restaurant to allow them to actually fund all those necessities that they need to do. But ultimately, it really needs to be a federal program. There is a tangential program working its way through the federal process right now. It's called the FAS, Federal Accelerated Stimulus Program. And it basically is business interruption insurance. It operates on the business interruption insurance model, where the federal government would put money into the hands of banks and insurance companies and allow them to get it directly to the operators. And then they already have the built-in procedures to protect against fraud and misuse of funds. And so it would basically be a federal backstop program where restaurateurs could apply for the money that has not been paid out on the business interruption insurance claim. But that it's probably the number one issue that has come up in terms of this is what a problem is, and how do we solve it. I don't think the legislature can retroactively write a bill to mandate an insurance claim gets covered. But as I said, the legislation being filed is important because it shows the importance of the issue, and hopefully our state officials can relay to our federal officials the importance of that happening.
Excellent. Well, we really appreciate that overview and some great questions. Michael, you've been working on the local level, and actually some of the issues that emerged that Steve is looking at both regionally and nationally, we've talked about in the last few weeks on this show in terms of maybe expanding the premises, the licensed premises where restaurants can serve to accommodate social distancing, and maybe some street closures to be able to use some public spaces to accommodate diners and things like that. Can you just give us an update in terms of where you're at and really as the clearinghouse of information locally between the business community and the government, and what's happening at the chamber?
Sure. Thanks, Troy. Just before I go into that, just a couple of comments. Just want to backtrack a little bit just to Beth and Bill's and Steve's comments regarding the PPP and the disaster recovery. Other small businesses, we're, as you said, we're kind of like the clearinghouse for information, and we're getting emails and phone calls from businesses all the time. And there is a very large group of individuals who are very, very frustrated with that process. People that did not have the relationships with the local banks. I completely agree with Beth. The local banks, the regional banks really stepped up to the plate, put in task forces and tried to make it happen. We've gotten a lot of folks who are frustrated by the time they've gotten through the process, had somebody call them back. the funds had dried up. So we're hoping round 4 is going to come through. We're hoping that there's going to be more money available, because there are a lot of small businesses out there that did not get that money, and the money is dried out. As you had alluded to, what we talked about with our select board chair, Megan English Braga and Sue Moran, was what's it going to look like when businesses reopen, and what can we do to help support these businesses during this time. I'm thankful to say that everyone has really been very cooperative. The tone from the select board has been incredibly positive and cooperative. We've had some meetings with Michael DeGiano, the executive director of the Falmouth EDIC, the Economic Development Industrial Corporation, as well as local banks, where the town, the chamber, the EDIC, and the local banks are trying to put together a fund right now. We're envisioning something in the $2 million, possibly more range, that we can actually put together some micro loans to get to the small businesses that fell through the cracks. That's a work in process. As you can imagine, it's not something that can happen overnight. It's not like going to the federal government. This money would not be coming from the federal government. It would be coming from local banks. It would be worked on through the Falmouth EDIC, the town, the chamber. We are working on that, and hopefully we'll have some good news going forward. But the other thing that's really important is starting to take a look at what this is going to be like when we reopen for business. I think Steve hit an excellent point, which is that restaurant industry has really been the hardest hit. And when it's time to reopen, is probably going to be limited due to social distancing. So what can we do as a community to enable those restaurateurs to be able to quickly, rapidly get back and kind of get back up to speed? And if there's going to be social distancing involved, then does that include having tables outside as the weather gets warmer? One of the things we've talked about, and the select board has been open to talking about it, is closing Main Street. Falmouth Police Chief Dunn has been a proponent of talking about this. And, I don't know what that looks like, if that's like a permanent thing for the summer, if it's a weekend thing, a la Church Street in Burlington, Vermont, where restaurants can put tables outside. To Steve's point, you go into reservation system. You don't have people hanging around. And what will get people to come downtown, not just to support the restaurants, but the retail. And this also has to be expanded to the other restaurants, whether they're in North Falmouth, Woods Hole, East Falmouth, to go into the parking lots and all. The one thing, I don't want to take up a lot of time, but the one thing I think we have to keep in mind, which I've talked about before, is that we've got 32,000 people here. Overnight, we're going to go to 65 to 70,000 people just because of the second homeowners who are going to be coming down here in July. They own a home here, they're paying taxes on it, they're going to come down, and what can we do to make them feel comfortable to come out and support our local businesses? This is like a 100% increase in population, and I'm not even talking about tourism. Then when you start getting into tourism, there'll be more people that are coming, maybe later on in July, in August. But once the school year is done and people are starting to move in, we're going to have a captive audience of people who are here to support restaurants and retail, and we have to do whatever we can to make them comfortable and to support our local business owners to recoup the money that they're losing right now.
That's a great point. And as two local restaurant owners who really support not only your employees, but when you think about it, the layers and the ripples that our restaurant industry locally and nationally support, right? It's the transportation industry and the people getting goods and services to your places. It's advertising, and there are just so many ripple effects that restaurants have that other retail businesses, as vital as they are, don't. So you really are the backbone of the economy. And so both Bill and Beth, what's your thoughts or your reaction to the discussions that we've been hearing from Michael and from Steve in terms of what does it look like on the other end?
Well, I think it's very the thinking outside the box. I hadn't heard the idea about closing Main Street, but I think it's brilliant. I think pedestrian-friendly spaces are always popular, and that I think that would be have a big impact, especially for all those people on Main Street. It's a great idea, which I would support wholeheartedly. I do think there's a lot of legal issues associated with serving alcohol and the containment of that. Massachusetts is a particularly onerous regulatory environment when it comes to alcohol laws, and compared to other states. And I think, you know, in the same way that we're making shifts that may never return, like we're shifting to a world in which it's perfectly normal to have a television interview via everybody calling in from their home office. And you may be meeting clients that way and meeting people for the first time that way, and you don't necessarily go to a conference anymore. I mean, a lot of things I think can have an impact. Perhaps some loosening of these laws surrounding the serving of alcohol might be appropriate at this juncture.
Absolutely.
Yeah, excellent. Bill, what do you think?
I'm afraid I'm the pessimist in the group. Sorry, Mike, but I don't know what it's going to look like when you open up. If I open up on July 4th, number one, I don't have enough employees to open the place, which is a problem because I don't have my H-2B employees coming in. Secondarily, and I think Gary pointed out, Wuhan, China has 50 million people in it, and they're not rushing out to restaurants right away. So I'm not sure you're going to see that kind of a rush to come out. My wife would love to go out and visit her friends and all, but I'm not going to a restaurant for a while at my age. And there are a lot of people my age who are going to say, wait a minute, what am I doing? Now, they may have things at home. They may do takeout, as you point out, and we're looking at doing takeout perhaps. But I don't know what it's going to look like. You can't convince me at this moment. You know, Steve, we've talked about it. You're going to walk into that restaurant. The hostess is going to meet you. You got to get through the lobby. You got to sit at the table. The waitress is going to meet you. The busboy is going to see you. The bartender has touched your things. The cook has done it. The runner has touched it. There's so many hands involved. I don't understand how social distancing works in this situation. And I don't be a pessimist, but I'm hoping for the better. I'm sorry that I'm a realist, and I look forward to it.
Well, I'm going to riff on that, Bill, because I'm a pessimist too. And I think we have to think, you know, when Ben Franklin said something like the health of a nation is the wealth of, or no, the wealth of a nation is the health of that nation. And we can talk about wanting to be open, but until we are actually healthy enough and comfortable with our healthcare system, all the talk in the world is not going to get people into these settings.
So I guess I'm saying I got to see what's going to happen before I get in.
I agree. And really, so my whole point was, you know, we have to think outside the box and work collectively to make people feel comfortable.
Yeah, I agree.
Mike, you're doing a great Chamber of Commerce. I love that one. Tell the Chamber the sun is always out right on Cape Cod, and we don't have sharks. And
well,
that's great there. We're doing that.
You know, my favorite thing from Ben Franklin was that beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy.
The other thing too is, you know, restaurants are uniquely situated to be able to promote themselves as being safe places to operate. We already have strict food safety guidelines, strict food code guidelines. We have our serve safe requirement, you know, so we can market that as well to the consumer, that, you know, restaurants and hospitals are probably the two most regulated industries that we have, and there's a lot more restaurants than hospitals. And so I think there's an opportunity there to get out there and tell our story of the measures that we take on a daily basis to ensure that we're serving safe food and that we're keeping our customers safe. And so I think that will play into any efforts of relaxing the customer's concern as we start to ramp back up.
And I'm glad you're cheerleading for the Mass Restaurant Association as well. Way to go, guys.
Steve, this is Troy, and one of the things that we've talked about in this roundtable group over the last few weeks were exactly some of the things that you chatted about in your intro. And Beth makes a really good point, because we can lobby our local officials and work with the licensing authority, which in this community is the Board of Selectmen, to address the licensed premises for each establishment. But I think Beth is right. What would be required to really be able to do some of the things we're talking about are probably wholesale changes to the general laws of the Commonwealth, specifically for those policy wonks that are watching Chapter 138, which governs alcoholic beverages. Is the MRA doing work looking at those global issues in Massachusetts about working with the legislature to maybe make some more accommodations for the industry?
Absolutely. And so when the crisis first started, we've put things in kind of three different buckets. What were issues that needed to be addressed immediately? What were issues that need to be addressed during the crisis? And then what does recovery look like? And again, some of those things that we touched upon is, a streamlined UI process for employees that were entering into the system, allowing beer and wine as part of a to-go or delivery package. Some of the other things we're looking at is a common sense tip law. We have a very restrictive tip law in Massachusetts, and you have restaurants with streamlined operations. Customers are being very generous with the gratuities they're leaving, but under the definition, only an employee who's a waitstaff employee can share in those tips. Well, there are no waitstaff employees right now, and so the customer intends for that money to go to the entire staff, and the restaurant should be able to do that. We talk about the UI trust fund. We can't have employers get punished with their experience rating on the back end because all their employees have filed for UI. Do we have a self checklist for reopening? When the Board of Health is obviously going to come and re-inspect restaurants, but we can't get bogged down in that process if we have the green line to open. We already talked about expanding the existing footprint. What does the legislature have to do to allow a restaurant to serve in a patio or serve in a parking lot or serve on a sidewalk? Or if there's a town green, maybe the town can put out some tables that are 8 to 10 feet apart, and restaurants can serve those tables and give the customer a little more confidence in doing that. We need small business grants and zero interest loans. We need restaurant operators to be able to charge their customers for use of a credit card. We're only one of 7 states that has that restriction. We need incentives for landlords who are partnering with their restaurant tenants to save the business. We've heard horror stories and we've heard angel stories of landlords in terms of how they're dealing with restaurants. We talked about business interruption insurance policy. We need to delay or all the licenses and renewal fees that a restaurant has to pay every year. Those need to be addressed. We need to promote the serve safe that restaurants are using. We need hiring and retention tax credits. So that's all in the restaurant recovery package and all stuff that would be done at the state level. And then in terms of incentives for customers to eat out, we need increased marketing. We need a Rediscover Massachusetts campaign, kind of an in-state destination / staycations. We need local governments to promote the local restaurants to their people. And a very cool idea that I heard out of a company in Boston, and they operate nationally, is basically a business meal incentive. So business meals are going to be really slow to come back. They're probably going to come back last. This basically creates a government incentive for employers in other industries to give their employees a benefit as a voucher to eat out. And then the government gives a tax credit to that employer to encourage employees to go out to eat. So that's one way, kind of outside the box, that people have been thinking about. How do you drive more customers into the restaurants?
Boy, Steve, the MRAs, and you are a wealth of knowledge and ideas. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that is great. That is
Yeah, for sure. And it's just that kind of innovation that's going to be necessary to think about. One of the themes that we've talked about last week was how will we? And really, that's a global question with many second halves. How will we serve our customers? How will we partner with government? How will we reinvent the way restaurants do business? And Steve, you're a big part of helping both on the local and regional level restaurants figure that out. So we really thank you for your expertise.
And I'm going to get this video.
No, thank you.
I'm going to get this video out to as many restaurateurs on the Cape as I can. I'll give them the link to it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that has been a tremendous source of frustration for me, not in this pandemic, but just in general, is that tips law that you referenced. It's just true. It's really hard to build the sense of teamwork that you need to build between the kitchen and the front of the house when the tips are only going to the front of the house. And I don't think the customer understands that when they leave a very generous tip. And so I think, I've toyed with the idea of when we reopen, putting in like an administrative fee, not a service fee, that would be in lieu of the tip. I might say, if you don't want to make it, don't, but we're putting it on here. And that allows us to take control of that stream of funds and spread it equally amongst the whole team, which we cannot do now legally. We're not allowed to do that.
But a lot of things you mentioned, Steve, go beyond just the restaurant business. And I think that the small businesses on the Cape and Falmouth will be able to be helped by some of your thoughts and ideas. So all those things extend beyond just the restaurants.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Beth, one of the things that you said in quoting Ben Franklin was the health of a nation is the wealth of a nation. And so one of the spots that we've done every time we've done this show for the last month now is take some time to look at the trends of the pandemic itself, but through the eyes of real data and someone on our team who's experienced in interpreting and compiling data. So Gary, I'm going to ask you to take the screen and really share with us some updates on trending and the continued vital importance of social distancing.
Okay, I'm going to take the screen now. Tell me if you see this. You
Yep.
see the thing that's great. Thanks. Okay, so this is data as of April 19th. I've got a list of sources. And there's some forecast in here from other sources. They're not my forecast. They are forecasts from some popular sources, which we'll put out. I want to emphasize both from the standpoint of the experienced forecasters and from this data that our sample sizes are limited. In the US, we've tested 1.18% of the population. Massachusetts, about twice that, 2.35% of the population. Massachusetts is actually doing very well compared to a lot of the country. Also, as I mentioned every week, this is not a random sample, so statistical inferences are suspect. The sampling is really done around healthcare concerns and immediate concerns, not about trying to figure out what's going on. So forecast uncertainty is high. We talk about this every week, the idea of geometric growth. And where are we along this curve? You would like to get below 1. And I'll show you a plot of both Massachusetts and the United States. We made some progress. If you remember, about a week ago, Massachusetts is kind of the orange line here. We were hovering a little bit under 10% growth. Now it looks like we're getting down kind of around half of that, and with the United States a little bit less than that. We'd like to see this down to 1. So the trend is in the right direction. That's the good news. But remember, again, the sampling is very small. And this is a new chart for this week that I want to show. This is Massachusetts daily new cases. Okay, so this is the number of new cases per day on the top chart. And this can start to make you feel a little optimistic because you see that it's starting to trend down if you look here. But then you see these little dips in here. So I want you to call your attention to the chart underneath, which is the number of tests that we do by day. And that's not a flat number, it goes up and down. So for instance, this valley in here and the number of tests corresponds to this valley in here and the number of new cases. So that makes that valley very suspect.
Link to this.
I'm sorry?
We'll send a link to this to Steve so he can see these charts later.
Okay, very good. And so the other thing is you could get optimistic and say, well, that's 4 days in a row of going down. But this last day, which was Sunday, there was very few tests. So I would look at that as suspect, although it is kind of encouraging that these 3 days in a row, or 3 days where the testing was pretty extensive. So, you know, have we crested? Are we on the way down? Interesting. You could draw what conclusions you may, but this is hard data. This is not speculative here. This is hard data. So now let's go on to the University of Washington that's been doing forecasting. We've talked about this forecasting, and their forecast model gets better every week. This work was funded by the Gates Foundation. So this is just presenting the data. And I'm going to focus this time not on the United States, but just on Massachusetts. Now they've improved their model. Their model before had just 4 factors in it, and they went to 6. They looked at when did we start mass gatherings? When did we do initial business closures? When did we close education? When did we close non-essential services? Have we implemented a stay-at-home order? And have we implemented travel restrictions? And those 2 they are not giving us credit for. This is a chart here of projected, and it's very sad, death rates. You talk about numbers, these are real people. So what's interesting about this is the numbers have gone down in their latest forecast model. But the other thing that they've done is they've kind of run their model out. And according to, again, the University of Washington's model, they think that we could start to relax the containment strategy on June 8th. Now, again, this is a model that changes week to week. So, and it is a model. That is all it is. It's not my model. It's the University of Washington's model. Now they're saying though, when that happens, that says that we have a lot of testing, we do contract tracing, we maintain some level of isolation, and we limit gathering size. So this is not Mardi Gras, just open up and go crazy. This is a step on the way to being more open. Also, here's another chart, again, from the University of Washington's model showing peak hospital utilization. A week ago, they thought that this had moved out. Now they're thinking we've gone by it. So they're showing that we're kind of there now, or we're 2 days past it if you can use the model at that level of resolution. And the other good news is if they are correct, that purple line is kind of the hospital capacity in the US. So we're staying under it. God help us, I hope this is true. But that's their latest rev on the model. And then finally, I want to show you Barnstable County data. And, there was a little bump on the 19th. You can't take a look at any one data point and draw a conclusion because, again, testing is different amounts on different days. But that's kind of the raw data. So I'll go back to away from the screen for any discussion.
And as always, Gary, thank you so much for that. So that provides an empirical basis for our continued discussions to really understand both here on the Cape in Barnstable County and throughout Massachusetts what's happening. And so I want to throw this back to our industry professionals and really get your reaction to that, because I think one of the things that we've been talking about for the last several weeks is sort of warning against the notion that when the trending goes downward, we flip a switch and things open back up. And what Gary said a few weeks ago is, the trending will go down because of social distancing, and it's important to maintain that. So even the reopening, call it maybe a soft opening, is predicated upon some form of social distancing and smaller groups still being in place. And so that's what really requires the out-of-the-box thinking, as you guys have called it, and innovation that will really refigure what the restaurant and retail industries look like, both here on Cape Cod, here in Falmouth, and beyond. So let's chat about that.
Gary, can you give your box of marbles analogy, please?
Okay, let's see if I can. So if you imagine a box of marbles where every marble was a person, and at least a few of those marbles were diseased, and you shook the box, kind of the harder you shake the box, the more socially interactive people are. The more those sick marbles bang into the other marbles that aren't sick, and they become sick. Now, if you could reach into that box every once in a while and grab all the marbles that were sick and pull them out, then you could shake the box pretty hard. Nobody would get sick, right? So tracking and tracing, you're hearing a lot about tracking and tracing. I think that, there's going to be some of that. It's hard to get out that last sick marble, right? So I don't think that you ever take 100% of the risk out of the system. What you do is you do your best to mitigate the risk, and balance that with making sure the economy still works, right? So there's going to be some level of that is the truth, but that's kind of the way to think of it. And if these models are right and we're kind of peaking now, certainly don't let your guard down now. But could the University of Washington be right? I don't know. I hope so. That the numbers are down to a trickle. Then you shake the box. There aren't very many sick marbles in that box. You track everyone. When you find one, you isolate them, and maybe get the economy going again.
I think, focus on exactly as you say, tracing, more testing. The idea that we might need to hire 300,000 contract tracers, that's the estimate nationwide. There's a bunch of new jobs for people, that's really a good opportunity for people. It's a phone job. I think, if you haven't read this article, The Hammer and the Dance, I highly recommend it. It's very interesting. We're in the hammer where we have to distance in a very extreme way, but if we do certain things, we can move into the dance, and the dance lasts until we have better treatments and a vaccine. And I think, that could be a year, it could be 18 months. So we have to be very mindful of the fact that this is a long game. We're playing a long game here, and the virus isn't going to go away. Massachusetts is number 3 of the, it's the third worst state in the nation. I think the fact that we're peaking and showing, what is a hopeful sign that we may be on the downside speaks to the thoughtfulness and care of the people of Massachusetts who are very intelligent, listen, care about science, and understand that they can make real changes to their behavior that will impact the safety of everybody. So I actually find that very encouraging. And I think that the dance can include lots of ways with the kind of innovations that Steve from the Mass Restaurant Association shared with us, and the kind of thinking, that the Falmouth Chamber is doing and others. The dance can involve ways to keep us economically viable. And I'm, just trying to think about those things and figure out what they are, but I think they're out there.
And Beth, I'm 100%, that's just a perfect statement. I'm 100% with you. And I also say that in Massachusetts, we've done pretty well. The governor's done a good job. A month ago, starting to build a tracking organization, fantastic, way ahead of the curve. That's exactly the right thing. We could get the testing up to speed as well. It would be, we can do exactly as you say.
Steve Baker's a great example of how government can help us. He's doing a great job leading this. He's brave and he's thoughtful, and he's made some excellent innovations. And it's unfortunate that we're number 3, but he's doing everything that he can to make it better. And I think it's working. So.
And on the local level now, it's up to us to figure out really how to dance with one another. And how, Michael, how we dance with the local government, and really that's the key, and reframing the discussion and the thinking, really creating a new paradigm about what that relationship is between local government and business.
Michael, are the chambers getting together and talking? I know the Cape Cod chambers, but are all the local chambers getting together?
Oh, on a daily basis with the Cape Cod Chamber and with all the other chambers. Everybody is sharing information, supporting each other. The Cape Cod Regional Chamber has been a great support to the local chambers. It's been phenomenal. It's really been great. And also working with Mass Office of Travel and Tourism and other groups. People are talking, sharing information, to kind of like to support what you're saying there, Troy. The beauty, again, Governor Charlie Baker is doing an outstanding. I think the administration's done a remarkable job. And I think our local elected officials are working really hard to think outside of the box and work, again, back to some of the things we were talking about earlier. And to Beth's point, it's onerous to go through this. It's not easy. We have to think things through, the liquor licensing, the parking, everything. But, I wouldn't go so far to say Bill is a pessimist. I would say you're a realist, and I respect and admire that. I really, really do. But I think there's a balance. And I think we have to be somewhere between, somewhere in the middle, where we are taking extra precautions. The health and welfare of everyone comes first and foremost. But with an eye toward doing what we can to mitigate whatever damage there is, to keep our economy moving forward, not at the expense of people's health, but also to just, make sure that the overall community doesn't suffer unduly. We have to think outside of the box, come together, find that balance to do the dance, right, Beth?
Well, that's a great segue to Falmouth Cares. And what I've seen Bill do is, not only, I read in the Cape Cod Times about how he's supporting his own employees, which is incredibly generous and important. And I think most business owners are doing things like that. But also to think of the broader community. What about people who are already on the curve, struggling to eat, to put food on their families' tables, a place to live? Those people are in great jeopardy, and anything that we can do as a community is critical. So, Troy, tell us all about Falmouth Cares.
Well, that's a great segue, and thank you, Beth. And I think you're right, that this whole effort started as a roundtable virtually between a few community-minded folks who just wanted to figure out how we could help. And two things emerged from that. One was this discussion that we've had weekly with local people trying to just help our neighbors and our friends understand how to get through this process. But the other part was, how do we support those that are most in need? And so Falmouth Cares, the charitable end of things, came out of that discussion. And Bill and Linda and Sam and Judy LaRusso very generously purchased 1,000 T-shirts that we've put up for sale. So all of the proceeds from those T-shirts are going to be split between the Falmouth Service Center and Belonging to Each Other. For those that don't know, is a local nonprofit that runs a homeless prevention program. And so just in the last week, we've sold over 300 T-shirts. You can see Gary and I are proudly wearing ours. Michael is holding one up so you can see what it looks like on the back. All of us have a background of the Falmouth Cares logo, and Beth, you have generously helped us promote our efforts. And so we really have taken what's become one of the most challenging times in all of our lifetimes and tried to turn it into something positive for our community. And it continues to resonate. And that's, we've seen the best of humanity here locally throughout this pandemic, and we'll continue to see it. And that is, that's so gratifying. I mean, on a global basis, we're seeing some incredible impacts of this pandemic, positive ones, right? You can see the top of the Himalayas for the first time in a century, and you can see the city of Los Angeles, and those things that we never thought we'd talk about 6 months ago. But here locally, we are seeing connections and relationships that are vitally important to the long-term health of our community. Because I would submit, Beth, that what you said a little while ago of the health of the community equates to the wealth of the community. That's not simply the physical well-being, right? But it's the emotional, spiritual, and psychological well-being of the community. Yep. What I call the soul of our community, that is also so vitally important. So
don't forget, Gary also contributed to a number of banners we have hanging around town, as well as the T-shirts we sent to the nurses at Falmouth Hospital. Remember that part of it?
Right.
Yeah.
No.
I always try to look at the positive in everything. I'm always going to be the glass is half full. And Beth, I think you can relate to this because your kids are similar age than mine. And although the quarantining thing has been really difficult, I have to say, Falmouth Public Schools has done outstanding job in meeting the needs of the students and the teachers. And I know the online education is really working out very well at home. And of course, having college-age kids too at home, like you and I have. But the dinner table conversations have gotten longer, deeper, and more gratifying. And I have to tell you, I'm encouraged by this younger generation really taking a look at the impact on society and what they actually can do. And so often, what's coming from my kids, we got to do better. We have to help those less fortunate. And, having this type of a crisis really does bring people together, Troy. And I know from a family level, I don't know, Beth, for you as well. I mean, we're enjoying a lot of quality time with our family right now, and I'm going to miss that. I want to get back to it.
I'm hearing this across the board from all my friends. I feel it myself personally and everybody that I've talked to. And I think, I was thinking about it. We don't know anyone who is still alive who would remember 1918. But it's important for us to know that only 100 years ago, we had this very similar situation happen in the United States and the world. And it shut the world down for 18 months. And there were huge impacts, and an extraordinary number of people died, and very sadly. But I bet if you had the chance to interview someone who lived through that, was 40 years old in the midst of that, what they would say to you was, that was one of the most precious times of my life. We came together as a community and as a family, and the kids didn't go to school, but we were together. And I know that we'll look back on this as, unusual and sad and hard, but also I know it will be positive in tons of ways.
Gary, you've been out helping spread the word about Falmouth Cares and providing those banners that you so generously donated to local businesses, and really interacting, of course, from safe social distances. But what have you found in terms of the soul of the community?
Well, you walk. I've walked up to a number of small businesses that are doing stuff like getting us groceries and stuff like that, and I've shown up with those posters, and people have looked back at me with a tear in their eye. And you know what? That's it, man. I mean, it's amazing that we build this gigantic infrastructure, and a little microbe can cause this much disruption. But I think Beth is right. This has changed. It's put everything in perspective. All that big stuff, the stuff that really counts is the people around you.
I mean, I will share one anecdote, which is that I had, I'm in the process of trying to control the bills and pay people and make loans, and cash flow is very, very tight. And I called a contractor that I've worked with for the entire time I've been here in Falmouth, which is going on 13 years. And I said, Arthur, I haven't paid you the last of this bill. And would it be possible, I'll pay you half, but I'll pay you interest. Could we stretch this out? And he called me back. I'd sent him an email, and he said, listen, I don't want you to even think about it for another minute. Don't think about it. It's fine. You pay me whenever you can. Yeah. And that kindness, I started to cry. It's so beautiful. That's what Falmouth is, that generosity without hesitation. I will help you. Of course I will. And I know that help I give you will help others. And that's what makes Falmouth a great place to live.
It sure is. And it's those kinds of acts of kindness that don't necessarily get publicized, that really are pervasive. And you see everywhere you go. And that's really, and I can tell you, having experienced many communities throughout the Commonwealth professionally, it's just not that way every place else. It is in some places, but here, I think this melting pot that we have with people from different life experiences and different cultures really creates that richness of the community and allows people to really connect. And Bill, you see it, I'm sure, because you bring people from all over the world to come work at your places, and I'm sure they comment on what a special place this is.
Oh, they love it here. There's no question about it. Try me a plug for We Cares again, Falmouth Cares. If people could pick up, if they could buy a dozen T-shirts at a time and help us distribute them to people, it'd be very helpful, because it's very expensive mailing them out. So if you get some and you get get a multiple amount, and then you help us distribute them that way. It's that's be very, very nice. Instead of the money going to the post office, it goes to the charity. I'm still paying for it, but I'd rather have more money going to the charity versus the post office.
No, that's a very good point. And lots of folks have asked about how to get the T-shirts. You can order them on the Belonging to Each Other website. That's BTEO.Falmouth.com. Or if you just Google Belonging to Each Other, it'll take you right to it. We've been posting, everyone in this circle has been posting on the social media or a website and providing access to that information. And Steve, we'd encourage you to buy a couple of T-shirts and show that.
I'm buying one for Steve. I'm going to send one to Steve. But maybe Beth could get
I'm happy to bring the Falmouth good spirit up here to the Metro West.
Excellent.
Beth could take a couple dozen and sell them from there.
Sure.
Go.
Yeah, tell me, when is the Flying Bridge open if I were to go by and pick up a couple dozen? Is there a time of day when you're there?
You tell me. I'd love to know. I don't leave my house, Beth. Are you kidding me?
No, I know, but you said that's where you're distributing from. So tell us that 10 o'clock on Tuesdays, you're always there or something like that. Not you, but someone.
Gary or Mike, we get Tyler to find a day that he's there. What day?
In the morning. Generally speaking, Beth, Tyler's there in the morning.
Okay.
Putting those things. So by 10, 11, 12 o'clock generally.
Okay.
But only go to see Tyler if you want 10, all right? Because we don't want Tyler sick, all right? So if you want 10,
10 or more,
yeah.
Purchasing 10 or more, go to Tyler. Otherwise.
And the other thing is the link is on the chamber website, as it is on a lot of things, but people can call the chamber, email me directly, mkasparian@falmouthchamber.com. I'll put you in touch with Tyler. We'll take care of you at a safe distance. So we'll get you the shirts if you need them.
Great.
And that's really the key, because we set up this supply chain specifically to respect the social distancing. And so for instance, I bought 10. Tyler left them in a bag in the lobby. I went and picked them up,
Got it.
But Beth, if you want to distribute some on your own, we can arrange for you to meet up there and grab, as Bill said, a couple.
Well, like we have a meeting of the Woods Hole Business Association later this week, and maybe I could bring,
What,
a
100?
dozen and sell them there.
Joe.
What, 100? It's sort of.
Sure.
Tyler's the general manager of the Flying Bridge, and he's done a phenomenal job with these T-shirts and helping out. So,
Okay.
thanks to Tyler.
Did we get Beth a banner?
Absolutely. Do you have a banner, Beth?
I don't have a banner, but
Oh, you're gonna have one. You're gonna have one tomorrow.
Okay.
Tomorrow.
I'll get it to her.
We'll talk. We'll talk after.
There you go.
So, and this is indicative, just this virtual roundtable of people whose, well, we have many connections amongst us, but our primary connection is our desire to be part of the solution here in our community. And just this informal discussion right here, where we're just, bantering back and forth, but all with the objective of trying to find a way to give back and create a better community, one day, one step, one connection at a time. And that's really what's so wonderful. And it's hard to believe, but we're already bouncing up against an hour that we've been chatting. So Beth, we really thank you for joining us. Maybe you can go back in a couple of weeks and
I'd love to.
update us on where you're at. Any final closing thoughts?
Just keep doing what you're doing. You guys are doing great. And this information is so helpful. And I know people are listening to it. They've told me it's just really helpful. And thank you.
Wonderful. And Steve, we really appreciate you joining us and hope you'll come back and provide us an update in a few weeks as well.
Absolutely. And, the restaurant industry is one of the most resilient industries out there. And I know we will all get on the other side of this.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Anyone else? Any final thoughts?
We're going to stay on afterwards, Troy?
You bet. Absolutely. All right. Well, on behalf of our team of Falmouth Cares, Bill Zammer, Gary Vacon, and Michael Kasparian, I'm Troy Clarkson. We thank you very much for joining us again. And we will be back next week because Falmouth cares. Take care. Be safe.
The Falmouth bells were tolling, and our hearts sang on. Was it the spell of our town, or an April dawn? Who knows if we shall meet again? But when the morning chimes ring sweet again, I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places that this heart of mine embraces all day through. In that small cafe, the park across the way, the children's carousel, the chestnut trees, the wishing well. I'll be seeing you in every lovely summer's day, in everything that's light and gay. I'll always think of you that way. I'll